Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. It was late, the kind of still, quiet evening where every little creak of the house felt amplified, as though the walls themselves were whispering secrets. The air in the room was heavy with an unsettling calm, and the only sound was the occasional ruffle of papers. As I flipped through my wife's documents, I never intended to snoop. I was just organizing the pile on her desk, but buried beneath a mound of receipts and old notes, I found her phone. Not unusual in itself, Olga was always misplacing things. But something felt off. I hesitated before opening it, but my curiosity got the better of me. As I unlocked it, my heart sank. There it was, like a slap in the face, a list of names. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe these were clients, friends, or some kind of to-do list. But the pit in my stomach deepened as I scrolled. No, this wasn't innocent. These were names I recognized: an old friend of mine, a coworker, even a couple of guys from the gym Olga and I used to go together, her lovers. And I sat there, frozen, my mind racing. How had I missed this? We'd been together for so long, built a life together, a marriage that I thought was unshakable. But this list shattered everything. The room felt colder now. Even the breeze from the open window, gently ruffling the curtains, felt like a mockery of the warm, safe home I thought we had. I stared at the names, unable to move, unable to breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage, disbelief, and something darker, something bitter. I should have confronted her right then. I should have screamed, thrown the phone, demanded answers. But instead, I did something else. I scrolled further, and that's when I found the medical reports. My hands trembled as I opened them, each line of text driving a nail deeper into my chest. Blood tests, doctor's notes, everything confirming one horrifying truth: Olga had contracted an incurable disease, and judging by the date, she'd known for months. Suddenly, the list of names took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just a record of betrayal, it was a death sentence she'd been passing around. These men, they didn't just sleep with my wife. They were probably infected now, just like her, just like I stopped cold. I hadn't been with Olga in weeks. I told myself it was work, stress, life getting in the way. But maybe I had been lucky. Maybe the universe had granted me a temporary reprieve. But those men, they weren't so lucky. Something snapped inside me. Not rage, not sadness, something colder, darker. I wasn't going to confront Olga. No, that would be too easy for her, too simple. She didn't deserve my anger or my tears. And those men, they weren't going to get away scot-free either. I knew what I had to do. Calmly, I stood up and walked over to my desk, picking up my phone. I scrolled through the contacts, finding the numbers, the men from the list: my old friend, the coworker, the gym guys. I started dialing. The first one answered after a couple of rings, his voice cheerful, unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. "Hey, Alexei, what's up?" he asked, as if nothing had ever happened. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Hey," I said, my voice calm, even friendly. "I just wanted to congratulate you." There was a pause on the other end. "Congratulate me? For what?" "For the gift you got from Olga. You'll probably notice the symptoms in a few weeks, maybe less if you're unlucky." The confusion in his voice was palpable. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the disease, man. You should get tested. Soon." I hung up before he could respond. There was no need for a confrontation, no need for an explanation, and let the panic set in. Let the fear consume him, just like it had consumed me. One by one, I made the calls, delivering the same message, my voice steady, almost cordial, as if I were simply sharing the news of a new baby or a job promotion. But instead, I was telling them their lives were about to be destroyed. With each call, I felt a little more detached, a little more powerful. It was as if I had taken back control of the situation, turned the tables on them all. Olga had betrayed me, but I wasn't going to be the one who suffered. Not anymore. By the time I finished, it was late. The house was still quiet, the breeze still fluttering the curtains. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at nothing, my mind blank, my heart numb. There was nothing left to feel. I didn't wait for Olga to come home. Instead, I grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled a note, short, to the point, just like my phone calls. "Congratulations, you're all infected now." I left the note on the kitchen table where she'd be sure to find it and walked out the door. The night was dark, the air cool, but I felt nothing. Olga's betrayal had broken me, but in a strange, twisted way, it had also freed me. This was only the beginning. Aimed flowers and beginning. I left the house before Olga returned, disappearing into the quiet night. For the first time in days, my mind was at ease. No more doubts, no more questions, just a strange, cold certainty. It wasn't relief, not by a long shot, but the weight of discovery had been lifted. Now it was their turn to feel it. I wandered through the streets aimlessly, letting the cool night air clear my head. My phone buzzed in my pocket a few times, but I ignored it. I knew who it was. The messages would start flooding in soon, the panic spreading like wildfire through the men on Olga's list. I imagined the confusion on their faces, the fear tightening in their throats. Good, let them suffer. They deserved every second of it. Eventually, I found myself at an all-night diner on the edge of town, one of those places where time seemed to stand still. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a dim, eerie glow over the parking lot. I walked in, slid into a booth near the back, and ordered a black coffee. I wasn't hungry, just tired, bone tired. As the waitress poured my coffee, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window's reflection unshaven. Dark circles under my eyes, a hollow shell of the man I used to be. I looked broken, but inside, something had changed. I stirred my coffee slowly, my mind wandering back to Olga. She had been so careful, or at least she thought she had. All those nights she claimed to be working late, the weekends she spent with friends. I had trusted her completely, never once questioning her stories. I felt sick just thinking about how naive I had been, how blind. But the sickness was fading now, replaced by something colder, something more calculating. I wondered how she would react when she found the note. Would she panic? Would she laugh it off, thinking I was bluffing? Or would she crumble, knowing that her double life had finally caught up with her? Through the thought brought a faint smile to my lips. As I sat there, the buzz of my phone became more persistent. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I reached in my pocket and pulled it out, the screen lighting up with missed calls and messages. So I scrolled through them, recognizing the names men from the list. Some were short and panicked. What the hell is this about? Alexei, you better explain yourself, man. I need to talk to you. NLL. Others were more desperate. Please tell me this isn't true. I'm begging you. Olga wouldn't do this. She wouldn't, right? I didn't respond to any of them. Let them stew in their own fear. Let them wonder. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the bitterness, as if it were the last taste of control I had over the situation. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized I couldn't sit here forever. I had to go somewhere, but where? I couldn't go back to the house, not yet. Olga would be there by now, probably pacing, wondering where I'd gone. Maybe she'd try to call me, maybe she'd even try to explain, but I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. I left the diner and started walking again, the quiet streets empty, save for the occasional car passing by. But I wasn't sure where I was headed, until my feet carried me to the one place that had always brought me some peace, an old park on the edge of town. I used to come here as a kid, long before life got so complicated, back when the world made sense. It was deserted now, the swings creaking in the wind, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows over the grass. I sat down on a bench, staring out at nothing, my mind drifting. How had it come to this? I replayed everything in my head, trying to pinpoint the moment it all went wrong. Was it my fault? Had I driven her to this? Or had Olga always been this way, hiding behind a mask of sweetness and loyalty? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone. There was no going back. The hours slipped by and eventually the faint light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I answered without thinking. It was Ager, one of the men from the list. An old friend. His voice was frantic, on the edge of breaking. Alexei, man, you need to explain. What is this disease? What did Olga give me? And I leaned back on the bench, the exhaustion washing over me. I hadn't planned on speaking to any of them, but something in Ager's voice stopped me from hanging up. You should have thought about that before sleeping with my wife, Ager. Alexei, please. I didn't know. She didn't say anything. What is this disease? Is it fatal? I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. I wanted to see how far I could push him, how much fear I could instill. You'll find out soon enough, I said coldly. You all will. Ager let out a strangled sound, partway between a sob and a gasp. I'm sorry, man. I swear to God, I didn't mean for this to happen. But I didn't care. I hung up the phone, cutting him off mid-apology. His panic didn't affect me. None of them did. I was beyond that now. As I sat there, I thought about Olga. She must have found the note by now, must have realized the consequences of her actions. The men would be calling her too, demanding answers, panicking just like Ager. She'd be cornered, unable to escape the web she'd spun. That thought brought me a sick kind of satisfaction, but there was still more to be done. This wasn't over yet. I stood up from the bench, my body stiff and aching from the cold, and started walking again. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows over the park. It was a new day, but nothing felt new. Everything was broken, twisted, beyond repair, and I needed to decide what came next. Revenge was only the first step. What I needed now was closure, a way to end this chapter for good. But how? How do you end something that was built on lies from the very beginning? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. Not to her, not to that house, not to the life we had shared. Whatever came next, I would face it alone, and somehow that felt right. The first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the park's towering trees, but they did little to brighten the world I found myself in. The air was still cool, but I felt none of it. I just walked, aimlessly, drifting through the quiet streets as if I were a ghost. My body moved, but my mind was elsewhere, still circling the dark pit that had opened up beneath me when I found Olga's list. I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was going to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't go home. Not yet. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, and this time it wasn't one of Olga's lovers. It was her. Olga. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button. The rational part of me wanted to ignore it, to cut her out completely, to let her drown in the mess she'd made. But there was a part of me, an angry, bitter part that wanted to hear what she had to say, to hear her squirm. I swiped to answer and held the phone to my ear, saying nothing. Alexei. Her voice was breathless, a mixture of panic and confusion. Alexei, where are you? I just got home and saw your note. What the hell does it mean? I could almost see her pacing the living room, her perfect little world crumbling around her. The thought brought a grim smile to my face, though I knew she couldn't see it. I think you know what it means, I said, my voice cold. You know exactly what it means. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, like a trapped animal. Alexei, please, she began, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I don't know what you're talking about. I found the note, but what are you trying to say? Are you sick? I let out a bitter laugh. Me? No. But you are, Olga. And so are the men on your little list. Her breath hitched. What list? What are you talking about? I didn't have the patience for her lies. Not anymore. The list of names in your phone, I said, my voice rising. The men you've been screwing behind my back. I know everything, Olga. And I know about the disease. Don't pretend you didn't know. You've been passing it around like party favors. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to piece together a defense, an excuse, anything that would make this go away. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexei, this isn't what you think, isn't it? I snapped. Then tell me, Olga, what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been screwing half the town and infecting them with God knows what. She tried to respond, but her words were a jumbled mess of denial and half-hearted explanations. I wasn't. It's not like that. It's not. Stop, I said, cutting her off. Just stop. I don't want to hear your excuses. I've already spoken to them. The men on your list, I called them, told them what you've done. They know, Olga, they know everything. I could hear her breathing quicken again, this time more frantic, more desperate. What do you mean you told them? She asked, her voice shaking. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, I said flatly, that they're all infected. Congratulations, Olga. You've given them something they'll never forget. There was a sharp intake of breath, and then silence. For a moment, I thought she had hung up, but then I heard the faint sound of a sob. Alexei, please, she whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Her voice cracked, and the sobs came harder now. I could hear her crumbling, the wall she had built around her lies collapsing under the weight of the truth. But it didn't move me. Not anymore. You didn't know? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that your excuse? You didn't know you were cheating? You didn't know you were lying? Or did you just not care? I didn't know about the disease, she cried, her voice breaking. I swear, I didn't know. Alexei, please, you have to believe me. But I didn't believe her. And I didn't care. I'm done, Olga, I said, my voice hard. I'm done with your lies, your excuses, all of it. You made your choices. Now you can live with them. I ended the call before she could respond, before she could beg for forgiveness or try to explain her way out of this. There was nothing left to say. For a moment, I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand, the echo of her sobs still ringing in my ears. I should have felt something, satisfaction, maybe your closure. But all I felt was emptiness. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and started walking again, my mind racing. The satisfaction I thought I would feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a strange hollowness, a gnawing emptiness that I couldn't shake. The calls had been a temporary fix, a way to vent my anger, to make them all suffer like I had. But now that it was done, I felt no better than I had before. If anything, I felt worse. Olga's sobs echoed in my mind, but they didn't change anything. I knew she wasn't innocent. She'd betrayed me, shattered everything we had built. No amount of tears or apologies could fix that. I needed to go somewhere, anywhere, to clear my head. But as I walked, I realized there was only one place left to go. And I found myself outside of his apartment. Andrew, the friend who had betrayed me the worst. The old friend from school who had once been like a brother to me. His name was at the top of the list, and that hurt the most. Standing there, staring up at the windows, my hands clenched into fists. I could picture him inside, maybe just waking up, blissfully unaware of what was about to hit him. I had called him last night, just like the others, but he hadn't answered. Coward. He probably suspected something was wrong. Maybe Olga had warned him. Maybe he already knew. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that was building inside me. I wasn't thinking straight. This wasn't part of the plan. But I couldn't turn back now. I needed answers. I needed to see him face to face. I pounded on the door, the force of it rattling the frame. "Open up, Andry," I shouted. "I know you're in there." There was no answer, but I heard movement inside. He was in there, hiding like the coward he was. I pounded on the door again, harder this time. "Open the door, or I'll break it down." A few moments passed, and then I heard the click of the lock. The door opened a crack, and Andry's face appeared, pale and drawn. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess. "Alexei," he said, his voice hoarse. I can explain." I didn't give him a chance. I shoved the door open and stepped inside, my fists clenched at my sides. "You can explain?" I growled. "You slept with my wife, Andry? What the hell is there to explain?" He stumbled back, his hands raised in a pathetic attempt to defend himself. "I'm sorry, man. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "Didn't mean for what to happen? You didn't mean to screw my wife? You didn't mean to betray me?" Andry's eyes were wide with fear, his body trembling. "It was a mistake," he gasped. I was drunk. She came on to me." "I didn't." I cut him off, my voice a low growl. "I trusted you, Andry. I let you into my life, into my home, and this is how you repay me." He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I threw him to the floor, watching as he scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape. "There's no getting out of this, Andry," I said, my voice cold. "You're going to pay for what you did. All of you will." And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving him there, trembling, broken. But as I stepped out into the daylight, that hollowness was still there, gnawing at me. Revenge was supposed to feel sweet. But all I felt was empty. The morning sun was bright now, too bright for the world I was living in. It painted everything in warm golden hues, but inside I felt only cold. My hands were still trembling from the confrontation with Andry. As I walked away from his apartment, I kept clenching and unclenching my fists, trying to shake the feeling of his collar in my grip. I thought confronting him would feel better, that it would give me some sort of closure, but all I felt was more anger, more confusion. I had left him broken, terrified, just like I had left Olga, but it wasn't enough. It never would be. I didn't know where to go from here. The phone calls, the threats, the confrontations, none of it had brought the satisfaction I craved. I had unleashed my fury on them all, yet I still felt like the one who had been crushed, betrayed, and left hollow. I had no plan anymore, no direction. I just kept walking, as if moving forward would somehow solve the mess my life had become. The sound of traffic began to fill my ears as I neared the city's center, the quiet of the early morning giving way to the chaotic rhythm of the day. People were starting to go about their normal lives, heading to work, grabbing coffee, chatting on their phones. I watched them as I passed, feeling like a ghost drifting through a world that no longer belonged to me. I needed to clear my head to figure out what came next. But every time I tried to think, my mind kept returning to that damn list. I could still see the names, each one like a knife in my back. Andry's name, the hardest to swallow, lingered longest in my thoughts. He was supposed to be my brother, my closest friend. We had grown up together, shared everything. How could he do this to me? How could she do this? The phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another message. I almost ignored it, but something made me pull it out. So it was from Olga. "We need to talk. Please." It wasn't how you think. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the message. My hands gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might break. So what more could she possibly say? How could she even try to explain herself? But a part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had once loved, wanted to hear her out. Maybe it was for closure. Maybe it was for something else, something darker. Either way, I was going to face her. And I found myself standing in front of our house, sooner than I expected. The familiarity of it hit me like a punch in the gut. This was supposed to be my safe place, my refuge from the world. But now it felt like a crime scene, a monument to betrayal. I walked up to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. It was strange, feeling nervous in my own home, but I couldn't shake it. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Olga was sitting at a kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, unsure of what to say. I had rehearsed a dozen different confrontations in my mind, but now that I was here, the words felt hollow. She broke the silence first. "Alexei, I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I snorted, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Didn't mean for it to happen. You wrote their names down, Olga, and you kept a list. Don't tell me this was some kind of accident." She flinched at my words, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I didn't write that list for the reasons you think," she said quietly. "I didn't keep track of them to hurt you." But you didn't keep track of them to hurt me." I cut her off, my voice rising. You think that makes it better? That you think that somehow makes all of this okay? You cheated on me, Olga, with my friends, with strangers. And you didn't even have the decency to keep it hidden. You practically documented your infidelity. Her eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or fear, maybe both. She wiped her face quickly, trying to regain some control. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. I don't even know how it got this far. At first, it was just, I don't know, excitement, something new. But then, I slammed my fist on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. You destroyed everything for something new. You threw away our marriage for a cheap thrill. Her tears spilled over again, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew she had gone too far. She knew there was no coming back from this. I was stupid, she choked out. I was selfish. I just didn't think. I didn't think about what it would do to you, to us. Stop, I said coldly, cutting her off. Just stop. I don't want to hear your excuses anymore. She looked down, defeated. There was a long, tense silence between us. The air felt heavy, thick with everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, Olga looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. Alexei, please, she whispered. I know I've ruined everything, but I didn't know about the disease. I swear, I didn't. You're lying, I said flatly. You knew. She shook her head violently. No, I didn't. I swear. I only found out recently after it was too late. That's why I wrote the list. I was going to tell them, warn them, but you didn't. I finished for her. You didn't tell them. You didn't warn anyone. You just let it happen. Her sobs came harder now, and she buried her face in her hands. I didn't know what to do, she cried. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I thought maybe I could fix it. I laughed bitterly. Fix it? How, Olga? How do you fix something like this? She didn't answer, just sat there, shaking with sobs. I stared at her, feeling a strange mix of pity and disgust. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. And now she was nothing but a stranger, a broken, sobbing stranger. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Olga looked up at me, her tear-streaked face pale and desperate. Alexei, please, she whispered. Don't leave. We can. But I didn't let her finish. It's too late, Olga, I said quietly. There's nothing left to save. And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and into the daylight. The day was brighter now, the sun high in the sky. I squinted against the light, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. I had thought confronting Olga would give me some kind of closure, but instead, I felt even more lost. I had walked away from her, walked away from the life we had built together, but what came next? Where did I go from here? The phone in my pocket buzzed again, but I ignored it. I didn't need any more messages, any more calls. I needed space. I needed time. But time wasn't going to fix this. Nothing could fix what had been broken. I walked down the street, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. Olga's sobs still echoed in my ears, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. And as much as I wanted to believe that walking away was the right thing to do, part of me knew that this wasn't over. Not yet. The reckoning had just begun. As I walked away from the house for what I knew would be the last time, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't peace, but more like the calm before a storm, the kind where you can sense the chaos brewing just beneath the surface. I hadn't felt better after confronting Olga. If anything, I felt worse. The confrontation had left me raw, my mind more tangled than before. The streets felt emptier than usual, like the whole world had shrunk to just me and my thoughts. I wasn't sure where to go next. There was no plan, no clear direction, just a gnawing emptiness and the faint throb of rage that hadn't fully dissipated. I wandered for hours, my phone buzzing every now and then with messages I didn't bother checking. I knew what they were: more fallout from the calls I'd made, more panic from the men who had shared my wife. They didn't matter anymore. None of them did. I had cut all of them loose, set them adrift in their own fear and guilt, just like I had done with Olga. But that nagging emptiness remained, no matter how many people I left shattered in my wake. My revenge hadn't filled the void inside me like I thought it would, and I was starting to realize it never would. I found myself in front of an old bar that Andrea and I used to go to in our younger days back before all this madness, when life was simpler. It was the kind of dive that never changed, no matter how much time passed. The windows were dark and grimy, the neon sign above the door flickering intermittently, just like it had years ago. Without thinking, I walked inside. The smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hit me the second I stepped through the door. It was nearly empty, save for a few regulars slumped over at the bar, nursing drinks and staring blankly at a TV mounted in the corner. I headed straight for a booth in the back, my mind elsewhere. The bartender came over and asked what I wanted. I didn't care, so I ordered a whiskey and sat back, staring at the table. my thoughts drifting to the conversation I'd had with Olga. I could still see her face tear-streaked, pleading, as if she really thought there was something left to salvage. She had been scared. No, she had been terrified. And for a fleeting second, I almost believed her, almost. But then the rage came flooding back, reminding me of the months, years she had lied to me, betrayed me with those men, pretending all along that we had a life worth living together. My drink arrived and I downed it in one go, wincing at the burn. The whiskey did little to dull the ache in my chest. I wanted to drown in it, to forget everything, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. No amount of alcohol could erase what I'd seen, what I'd learned. As I stared into the empty glass, a voice interrupted my thoughts. "So, Alexei?" "Alexei." I looked up, startled. It was Dmitri, another old friend from our circle, one I hadn't spoken to in years. He stood at the edge of the booth, looking hesitant, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his leather jacket. I hadn't expected to see him here. We drifted apart over the years, but seeing his face stirred something inside me. Dmitri had always been the quiet one, the observer. I didn't remember seeing his name on Olga's list, but at this point, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. "Dmitri," I said, nodding toward the empty seat across from me. "Have a drink with me." He hesitated for a moment, but then slid into the booth, signaling to the bartender for another round. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the tension thick between us. I could feel his eyes on me, studying, waiting for me to speak. "You look like hell, man," he said, finally breaking the silence. "What's going on?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You don't want to know." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But you look like you need to talk." I stared at him for a long moment, wondering how much he knew. Dmitri had always been good at reading people, at seeing through the masks we all wore. And right now I was too tired to keep mine up. So I told him everything. I told him about the list, about the disease, about Olga and Andriy and all the others. I told him about the calls I had made, about the cold, calculated revenge I had exacted on each and every one of them. And as I spoke, I could see Dmitri's expression darken, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. When I finished, there was a long silence between us. Dmitri leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly as he processed everything I had said. "Jesus, Alexei," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. That's a lot," I snorted. "Yeah, no kidding." Dmitri looked down at the table, his brow furrowed. "Andriy, I can't believe it. I mean, we all knew Olga was, well, flirty, but I never thought she'd actually." He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. I stared at him, my eyes narrowing. "Wait," I said, my voice low. "What do you mean we all knew?" Dmitri looked up at me, his face pale. "Alexei, man, it wasn't a secret." "Not really. We didn't know for sure, but there were rumors. Olga's always been, friendly. Friendly." The word hit me like a slap in the face. I had been blind, hadn't I? All those years I had trusted her, believed in her, while everyone else had seen the truth. My fist clenched on the table, rage boiling inside me again. "Why didn't you say anything?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Dmitri shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't want to get involved, man. None of us did. It wasn't our place to." "It wasn't your place," I snapped, cutting him off. "You were supposed to be my friend Dmitri. All of you were. And you just let this happen." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I stood up, the booth scraping loudly against the floor as I pushed it back. "Forget it," I muttered, turning away from him. "I don't need this." "Alexei," wait, Dmitri started, but I was already halfway to the door. The air outside was cool, but it did little to soothe the fire burning in my chest. I walked quickly, my mind racing. Dmitri's words echoed in my head over and over again. We all knew. They had all known. The signs had been there clear as day, and I had been too blind, too trusting to see them. How many others had watched me, knowing what was happening behind my back, and said nothing? It wasn't just Olga who had betrayed me. It was everyone. As I walked, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, expecting another message from one of the men on the list. But this time it was Olga. I didn't want to read it, didn't want to hear any more of her excuses, but something made me open it. "Please come home. I need to talk to you. I'm so sorry, Alexei. I'll do anything to fix this. Please just come back." Her words felt empty, meaningless. I had heard all her apologies before. I had heard her lies, and now I was done. I turned the phone off, shoving it back into my pocket, and kept walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. Not to her, not to that house, not to the life I had once believed in. I had burned it all down. Now, I had to live in the ashes. I walked aimlessly through the city, the cold air biting at my skin, but I barely felt it. I was numb to everything, numb to the world around me, numb to the people I had once called friends, numb to the woman I had once loved. Everything felt distant, as if I were watching my life from the outside, detached and hollow. So the streets were crowded now, the hum of daily life all around me, people rushing to work, cars honking, vendors shouting, but it all felt like background noise, a world I no longer belonged to. I had severed every tie, burned every bridge, and now was left drifting in the wreckage. Dmitri's words still echoed in my mind. We all knew. The truth had been right there in front of me the whole time. Everyone had seen it but me. It wasn't just Olga who had betrayed me. It was everyone I thought I could trust. And what made it worse was that they hadn't cared enough to stop it. They had watched my life unravel, and they did nothing. I stopped in front of an old park, staring blankly at the rusted swing swaying in the wind. This park used to mean something to me. Olga and I had spent time here back when things were good. We'd come here when we were younger, before the kids, before the lies, and sit on those swings, talking about life, making plans for the future. But now, all those memories were tainted, poisoned by what I had learned. It was as if every good moment, every happy memory, had been built on a foundation of deceit. I couldn't look at that park the same way. I couldn't look at anything the same way. I lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply, letting the smoke fill my lungs. It was a temporary distraction from the pain, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I ignored it. It didn't matter who it was, Olga, Dmitri, one of the other men. None of them mattered anymore. I was done with all of it, but the buzz persisted, vibrating insistently in my pocket, demanding attention. With a sigh, I pulled it out, expecting another pleading message from Olga. But it wasn't. It was Andrei. It was Andrei. I stared at the screen, surprised to see his name pop up. I had left him broken, terrified just like the others. After our confrontation, I hadn't expected to hear from him again. But here he was, reaching out. For a long moment, I debated ignoring it, letting it go to voicemail. But something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe a need for answers, made me swipe to answer the call. Andrei, I said, my voice cold. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a shaky breath. Alexei, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We need to talk. Please. I could hear the fear in his voice. The same fear I had heard in Olga's. They were all scared now, scared of the mess they had made, scared of the consequences that were catching up to them. Part of me relished that fear. It was what they deserved. But another part of me, one didn't want to acknowledge, was tired. Tired of the anger, tired of the pain, tired of the endless cycle of betrayal and revenge. What is there to talk about, Andrei? I asked, my voice flat. You slept with my wife, so you lied to me. What more is there to say? I didn't know, he blurted out, his words coming in a rush. I didn't know she was married. I didn't know she was your wife. She didn't tell me. I swear, Alexei, I would never have done it if I knew. I snorted. You expect me to believe that? After everything? I'm telling the truth, he pleaded. I swear, man. Olga, she didn't tell me anything. She said she was in an open relationship, that it wasn't serious. I didn't know, Alexei. I didn't know. His words hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Was he lying? Was this just another excuse, another way to deflect the blame? Or was he telling the truth? Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice hard. After everything, why should I believe anything you say? Because I have nothing to gain by lying to you, he said quietly. Look, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I didn't do it on purpose. If I had known, I would have never gone near her. You have to believe me. If there was something in his voice, something raw, desperate, that gave me pause. I wanted to hate him, to punish him, but in that moment, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I had been lied to for so long that I didn't know who to trust. Maybe Andrei was telling the truth. Maybe he had been just as much a victim of Olga's lies as I had. But did it even matter? I was so deep into this mess, so consumed by anger and betrayal that I couldn't see a way out. Whether Andrei was telling the truth or not, it didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the fact that my life had been ripped apart, that everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I don't care anymore, I said finally, my voice cold. I don't care what your excuse is. You still slept with her. You still betrayed me. Alexei, please, he said, his voice breaking. I'm begging you. I'll do anything to make this right. If you can't make this right, I said, cutting him off, none of you can. And with that, I ended the call. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. Andrei's words echoed in my head, but they didn't bring me any peace. If anything, they made everything worse. I had wanted answers, but now that I had them, they only added to the confusion, to the pain. I threw the phone into the park, watching it disappear into the grass. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need any of them. The hours slipped by as I wandered through the city, my mind a fog of anger and regret. I ended up in a part of town I hadn't been to in years, a place I used to visit when I wanted to get away from it all. It was a small, run-down pub, tucked away in an alley where no one went unless they were trying to disappear. The dim lights inside were comforting in their familiarity, and I slipped into a booth in the corner, ordering another drink. The whiskey burned as it went down, but I welcomed the pain. It was a distraction, if only for a moment. I stared at the empty glass, my mind wandering back to Olga. I wondered what she was doing now, if she was still sitting in the kitchen, waiting for me to come back. Or maybe she had given up, realizing that there was nothing left to salvage. I thought about her apology, about the tears in her eyes when I walked out. Part of me wanted to believe she was truly sorry, that she regretted everything she had done. But another part of me knew better. She had lied too many times, broken too many promises. Even if she was sorry, it didn't change the fact that she had destroyed everything. The bartender came by and refilled my glass, but I barely noticed. The numbness was spreading now, wrapping itself around me like a blanket. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, it all seemed distant, like it belonged to someone else. I was so deep in my thoughts that I didn't notice the man who had slipped into the booth across from me until he spoke. "You look like hell." I glanced up, startled. It was Ager, one of the men from Olga's list. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. He looked as bad as I felt. "What the hell are you doing here?" I muttered, taking another sip of whiskey. "I was looking for you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you, Alexei. We all do." "And they?" I stared at him, my eyes narrowing. "We," he nodded, glancing around nervously. "The others, the guys you called, we need to talk. We need to figure this out." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "There's nothing to figure out, Albert. You all slept with my wife. You all got what you deserved." Iger shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands fidgeting on the table. "Look, I get that you're pissed. We all screwed up. But this thing you did, telling everyone they're infected, it's messed up. Man, it's not true, right? We're not really." I cut him off with a sharp glare. "You think I care about what's true anymore?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. "Alexei, please, we need to know. If it's not true, then maybe we can fix this. But if it is, we need to get help. We need to." You needed to leave," I said coldly, my voice low. "Now." Iger hesitated for a moment, then stood up, his hands trembling. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but the look in my eyes stopped him. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the bar, disappearing into the night. I watched him go, feeling nothing. There was no fixing this. Not for them. Not for me. We were all trapped in this, caught in a web of lies and betrayal with no way out. And as I sat there, staring at the empty glass in front of me, I realized something. I had lost. Not to Olga, not to Andrei, not to any of them. I had lost to myself. The pub's dim lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat alone in the corner, staring at the empty glass in front of me, feeling the crushing weight of everything I'd done. The anger, the betrayal, the revenge, it all felt like a distant memory now, like something that had happened to someone else. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was just empty. The last few days had been a blur, a whirlwind of calls, confrontations, and shattered lives. And what had it all been for? To punish them? To make them feel what I felt? I thought the revenge would fill the void, that it would give me closure, but it hadn't. All it had done was hollow me out even more. I hadn't fixed anything. I hadn't gained anything. All I had done was destroy. And I pushed the glass away and rubbed my temples, trying to will away the pounding headache that had been building for hours. The bar was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers nursing their drinks, staring blankly at the TV. Even Ager had left, terrified and broken after our conversation. I'd sent him running, just like I'd sent all the others running. And yet I was still here, still trapped in this mess, still spiraling. The bartender wandered over, refilling my glass without a word. I stared at the amber liquid, watching it swirl lazily in the glass. I didn't want it. I didn't want any of this, but I couldn't leave either. Not yet. A few minutes passed and the pub door creaked open again. I didn't look up at first, expecting another faceless stranger to drift in, but then I heard footsteps, familiar ones, and my heart sank. I knew who it was before I even saw her. Olga. Olga. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a moment, she hesitated by the door, as if she wasn't sure whether to come closer or turn around and leave. So I half hoped she would leave, that she would just disappear into the night and never come back. But she didn't. She walked toward me, her footsteps light but determined. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes bloodshot and puffy from crying. She looked worse than I had ever seen her, pale, thin, like she hadn't eaten or slept in days. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said, everything we had destroyed. Finally, Olga broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alexei, I can't these. Alexei, I chapto, wait, I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes on the glass, on the swirling whiskey that suddenly felt as heavy as the weight in my chest. "Please," she continued, her voice cracking. "You have to talk to me. I don't know what to do anymore." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "There's nothing left to say, Olga, we've said it all." She flinched, her eyes filling with fresh tears. No, we haven't. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you, Alexei. Stop, I said, my voice cold and tired. Just stop. Her sobs came harder now, and she buried her face in her hands, shaking. I watched her, feeling nothing, but I had no tears left for her, no anger, no pain. I had spent it all. There was nothing left. I'm so sorry, she whispered between sobs. I never meant for this to happen. I was stupid. I was selfish. But I still love you. I never stopped loving you, Alexei. I finally looked up at her, my eyes narrowing. You call this love? After everything you did? After everyone you slept with behind my back? She shook her head violently, her hands clutching the edge of the table. I was stupid. I was trying to fill some void inside me, but it was wrong. I know that now. I didn't think it would hurt you like this. I thought maybe you wouldn't even notice. I laughed again, louder this time, the sound bitter and sharp. Wouldn't notice. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I wouldn't care that my wife was screwing half the town? She flinched again, her eyes wide with guilt and fear. I was wrong, okay. I was so wrong, but it wasn't about them, Alexei. It was never about them. It was about me. I'm broken. I've always been broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. Broken, I repeated, my voice soft but venomous. That's your excuse. She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. I'm not excusing it. I'm not. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm begging you, Alexei, don't throw us away. Don't throw everything we built away. I stared at her for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to reach across the table and pull her to my arms to forgive her, to start over. But the other part of me, the part that had been broken beyond repair, knew that it was too late. I said, we've already lost everything. I said quietly, you threw it all away the moment you let someone else into our life. There's nothing left to save. Her face crumpled and she let out a soft, defeated sob. I watched her, feeling nothing but a hollow ache in my chest. I had thought that revenge would make this better, that punishing Olga and the others would somehow make the pain go away. But instead, it had left me with nothing but ashes. Olga wiped her eyes again, her hands trembling. We can still fix this, she whispered. We can go to therapy, we can. No, I interrupted. We can't. She looked at me, confused, as if she hadn't expected me to cut her off so sharply. I met her gaze, my expression hard. I don't want to fix this, Olga, I said, my voice firm. I don't want to fix us. We're broken beyond repair, and it's time to face that. Her lip quivered, and fresh tears welled in her eyes. But